Can we now please skip to the subtopic when your wife had experiences with God would put, as I like to name it, cloak of invisibility? Because you gave one example in the last a month ago in the
Right.
previous episode when God was protecting you and your spouse on a highway in a car when you know the enemy, the opposition couldn't even see you. You were literally protected, made invisible. Can you give us more examples of
Right.
God doing the same thing to you, or including you and your spouse together?
The first one I'm going to relate happened to me. Um, I I had come over the years since the 80s to recognize my wife and I met in 82, married in 83. Prior to that, I had already come to recognize that I had something of a stealth. Um, I was very aware of stealth in the natural, oddly enough, very drawn to stealth technology, airplanes and ships and anything else. Really fascinated by it, drawn to it, felt compelled to learn about it. Then it turned to um, saying and nudging me with the concept that there's that first which is natural, then that which is spiritual. You've heard me say that over and over again in the last podcast, and I've already said it a couple times now today. So uh, and so what he told me then was, and in the spirit, you and the person I'm going to lead you to are going to have a ministry. Some part of your ministry is going to be this with a stealth cloak, so that I can get you places that you wouldn't get otherwise. Now, while that was kind of in the background and from time to time happening, this this minister by the name of Brother Lawrence came along and had his own experiences of being invisible at the Russian border or the Iron Curtain countries that they were called in those days, going into communist countries with Bibles. And he would have his trunk absolutely filled, and he would have the back seat of his car completely loaded, and under blankets were all these Bibles. And he would come, excuse me, and he'd come to the border and just pray, Father, blind the eyes of the border guards. And the countless uh, experiences that he had. Well, I had the privilege of hearing him live a couple of times, as well as reading the book. And every
And
time
his book is called God's Smuggler, correct?
correct,
So
correct.
I think I read a book. It could be that one, or it could be a very similar one when an author mentions that he went not just the Soviet Union, but Czechoslovakia, Poland, former
That's right.
Yugoslavia, the country I'm
The,
coming from.
the
So
Warsaw Pact countries, yeah.
yes, so I think I read that book for a class while I was back at Moody. I
Mm,
forgot the name, but it sounds very interesting because the whole book was like uh, real lifetime experiences with God
yes.
doing insane things. And when I say insane, I
Yes.
mean in a good way. How God
Really
will
insane. Yeah.
use this guy or different people to smuggle Bibles. And I know that sounds so bad, like because usually when you use the word smuggling, it means like you're doing criminal things. If you're smuggling Bibles, and God did supernatural stuff in so many countries, people would get Bibles in their own language. So I just
Yep.
want to give that as the context. How
Thank
it's
you.
interesting that I read that book years ago, and now you're talking about it. So you actually
That's
met the author in person.
yes, and it was
Wow.
an absolute treat. Um, a couple that was again that was before my wife and I met. But the gentleman that I was working with at the time, he and I got in ourselves into places that we had no business being in, but it was all really wild adventures in the kingdom for us, and it was I cherish those days. But that was one of the events he took us through. We actually had some materials that we were distributing and selling at a booth. And so it got us into conferences and meeting speakers that we wouldn't otherwise have met or listened to. And that was one of the ones that happened. Also, Corrie ten Boom is another name from China who had some really amazing experiences. And we were lucky enough, fortunate enough, and blessed enough to meet her right hand woman who visited Toronto, and the pastor that we had at the time um, knew her, and she visited the church. And uh, behind the scenes, he orchestrated us being invited with her and another couple to a lunch, and we ended up in Chinatown, downtown Toronto, having dim sum with the right hand woman of Corrie ten Boom. Now, Corrie has a story that is like none other, and this woman has a story like none other, and nobody knows her story because everybody listens to Corrie ten Boom's story and the movies that have been made about her and the books that have been written. But this woman, it was again another amazing woman to sit down and just ask questions about in terms of what she experienced. And the story she related about Corrie was, I believe it was, I don't think it was her, I think it was Corrie, standing in front of a firing squad, pregnant in front of a firing squad. And the order was given to shoot, and all the bullets hit the wall behind her. Not one hit her. They pulled the bullets. They pulled the shells. They counted how many shells had been fired at her, not just the line of people. But one of the things we don't realize is that in a firing squad, there's a professionalism that happens. It's not just willy-nilly. And so they could literally figure out, yeah. So the bullets literally, the trajectory had to have gone around her. They didn't
Have
go
you?
through.
I'm sorry, I just have a question. Have you ever watched the movie Matrix?
Oh yeah, one of my favorites.
Oh, it's not the same, but like that ability of God stopping the bullets or rerouting them. So
Exactly.
God was doing that before Matrix. It's so cool. I'm sorry.
So
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because we're talking about the one who created everything. So you're telling me, not you, but if somebody has a problem with this, are you actually trying to say, without saying it, that the one who created the universe couldn't bend a bullet? So your response would most likely be, well, that goes against the laws of physics. Okay, but the one who created those laws is the one who also gets to alter them at his own will. And we just need to be okay with that. And so he created you and I as physical beings. But let's just go forward here. So we're in downtown Toronto at a meeting of the local general Toronto area pastors, and we're wanting as a group. There was about 50 of us. Excuse me. We wanted to discuss some things openly among each other. And see if we couldn't come to a consensus. This was during '94, and so the concern really was about it's great for the rest of the world, and they're showing up and taking it elsewhere. That's fabulous. But what about the local Toronto pastors? Right? What about them? What can we do about the local Toronto pastors? Well, I was one, and everybody there was one. So we wanted to find out what we could do about ourselves, and what might come out of that. We break for lunch. Across the street, I never forget this till the day I die. Across the street is a deli. 20 or so of us go to this deli. No, no, wasn't that much. Maybe a dozen. Maybe a dozen. We go to this deli, and I'm first in line. And so I give my sandwich order to the the woman behind the counter. She says, "Okay, thank you, sir. Not a problem." And she shuffles a few things. Now, a person who's got 10 or 12 people in a line shuffles nothing, right? This is lunchtime in a deli. It's called mise en place. Everything is in its place and ready. You don't just go, that's what this woman did in front of me. And I'm thinking that, wow, is this ever weird? Did she even hear what I said? And she finishes just kind of shuffling around, looks at the guy that I was co-pastoring with and said, "Yes, sir, can I take your order?" Hasn't done my sandwich, nothing. So his name was Bob. Bob says, "Sure, you can take my order, but ma'am, this gentleman is in front of me and he gave you an order. I think you need to do his sandwich first." And she looks not at me, looks at Bob and says, "Oh, I'm sorry." Why is she sorry to Bob? "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sure." Now she looks at me and says, "Oh, how can I help you?" Like I haven't ordered. So I gave her my order again. She looks at me, looks down at the cutting board, and then looks over at Bob. "Yes, sir. Can I have your order?" And so twice. So Bob says, "He's still standing here." But sure, okay. And he gives her my order. Now, by this point, everybody in the line has now heard this interaction, right? Person number 3 comes up. "Yes, sir. Can I, or ma'am, or whoever it was, can I have your order?" Well, this guy's still standing here. Can you please take his order? Because I feel really bad. Oh, sure. Once again, to that person, "I'm so sorry." And then looks at me and says nothing. Looks at me like she's looking through me, and then looks back at the third person and says, "Can I take your order?" They get their order. Fourth person, fifth person, sixth person. By this time, Bob is sitting at a table right behind me. And he's beside himself. Everybody in the line is giggling. And Bob says, "Hey, Ron, you're still standing there? You haven't been served yet?" Big volume, so she'd hear it, right? I said, "That's right. Been here all along." She turns, she's looking at the direction of my voice, but that's it. And then asks the next person in line for their order. And so when she does that, and she's making now that person's sandwich, this is like person 5 or 6. Bob says, "So what are you thinking about? What do you think? Is God up to something?" Again, same volume, right? "Is God up to something?" I said, "Bob, I think I'm on a forced fast." And all the while I'm saying that, I'm thinking, surely this woman can hear all this and see me, but apparently not. The whole line gets served, and I'm still standing there, dumbfounded. And and I stood there. I don't know how long I stood there. I honestly can't put a time on it because I don't know. I stood there. I was in shock. I was in absolute amazement that I was able to stand there this whole time. And so that I turned around and sat down with Bob. And we're just howling with laughing. And now we're walking across the street back into the church. And Bob said, "Seriously, Ron, what just happened?" And I said, "Bob, this is This would have been 95. This would have been about 95. Oh no, sorry. I'm sorry. It was in 94. 94 at the airport started in January, the end of January. This would have been in the summer. Okay, so it was still early days. And I said, so Bob, from the early 80s, this thing about stealth, Father's been talking to me about it pretty consistently. And the whole time, when Brother Lawrence came up, what I felt go off in my spirit, not only was I excited about his exploits, to use a word from Daniel, not only was I excited at those exploits, it went off in me like an atom bomb. I'm going to make you invisible. And so every time that went off in me, I would always question back, how do you make somebody invisible? Like, how does, and so I said, Bob, he just answered me. So I don't know what's about to take place. I know that Sigrid and I have a call to the body, and we're going to be traveling. And you know that. You know I've talked about that a lot. And so I don't know how imminent that is, but boy, it's close. And this tells me that I now know how to be made invisible. I've experienced it. I can't say he can't do it. I don't know what that is going to be like, but that's where it starts. And as it turns out, I was right. Which
You
we'll
know
get
that
into.
that story reminds me a bit to what was happening in Acts chapter 8 when the Spirit took Philip away and he was no more. He
Right.
wasn't dead. He was just transported, moved, taken to another location. So that didn't happen literally to you, but in the same fashion, going from one example of the stealth to another
Right.
example, it seems like the Spirit was doing something that we can only see in sci-fi movies or hear in some horror stories. Like, is this even impossible? And sometimes, attributes and abilities like these are usually given like to the enemy, like we see for example in the movies like with Predator,
Right.
fighting people
Right.
or alien, like Predator has this stealth alien technology that can do this to
Right.
himself. Or like sometimes people who both Christians and non-Christians, when they share their paranormal experiences in the woods, they would go and they would like sense this evil but they cannot see it, and then it would suddenly the entity would choose to reappear and materialize. So we usually hear about this ability. I won't say necessary technology, ability, technology, skill, whatever, but being
Right.
used by the enemy. But it can show from your example that it's not bad or evil in itself. It can be used for different purposes, but even God through his Spirit can camouflage people like you, his servants, for certain purpose, right? To
Yes.
for greater good. So in this case it was so that you would go certain places, do certain things, God through you, or in the example of Brother Lawrence, so that he would pray and Bibles would be hidden in his car. Even though if you would just open the box, you would see the Bibles, they even disappear, right? But
Yeah.
somehow it will be as if they disappeared, and all those communist guards, they'll be like, oh yeah, you can go through, and then he would bring the Bibles and they'll be camouflaged, they'll be smuggled, and like
Exactly.
all these amazing things. I'm just saying how, it's very cool to hear about the same things we hear in movies or horror stories that the enemy is using. Now we can hear how God can use similar thing but for greater good, and that makes me happy.
Yeah. And all the while keeping in mind that what God does is the original, and what the enemy uses is the copy. Right. The reasonable facsimile.